Okay, so welcome everybody to this webinar on IELTS writing. And my plan for today is to look particularly at things which stop people from getting higher bands, such as 7 and 8. Some of these things are fairly straightforward and things that you can change quite easily. And then I want also to look at some tips and suggestions for things that you can do quite easily to improve your writing skills, and also improve your access to the kind of language that you need for the IELTS writing. So for those of you that haven't met me before, I'm an English language teacher, and I've been teaching English as a foreign language for over 30 years now. And my experience with IELTS goes back, in fact, right to the beginning, where I was an examiner for something called the Davis test, and this is in the late 70s. And the Davis test is the forerunner of what is now the IELTS. But the IELTS in its current form for over 15 years as an examiner and also as a trainer. And most of my work in training has been done with doctors, and they have always required the highest band, so 7 overall, and now that's changed and it's 7 in each part. So I've dealt mostly with people that need high bands. And I want to talk today about the writing, which I think is probably the most difficult area for students because it is the hardest to self-assess and the hardest to really have a good idea of where you are. So I would urge all of you, if you have a teacher, if you're working with a teacher, or if you're not, to try and find somebody who knows about English at least, and preferably knows about English language and teaching, to have a look at your writing and see where the mistakes are, and more importantly, how you can correct those. One of the biggest problems is that we don't write essays in daily life. We speak, and so it's quite easy to practice that, and we listen and we read. But writing essays is not a natural thing that we do. Of course, it's possible to do the task 1, and if you're working in many fields that deal with numbers and data, then you may quite easily be asked to do that. But the essay is something that you do at school and university, but beyond, it's quite rare for that to be the case. And so it's not, if you like, a natural thing. Okay, so let's move on and have a look at Band 7 in writing. So here are some questions. If you don't know whether you can get a Band 7, or you don't know whether your writing that you're doing is capable of a Band 7, I think you need to ask yourself these questions. If you don't know your level, then obviously that's something you need to find out. And with the writing, it's quite difficult to do that unless, as I said before, you ask somebody who knows about these things to check it and give you an idea of where you are, or at least what your mistakes are. You can also analyse and study very carefully some Band 7 model essays, and there are plenty of these in the IELTS books and also around the internet. But try and get, not necessarily student ones, but try and get models rather than student essays in the first instance, because they will not have any mistakes in them. And then you can have a look at your writing against these models, and we'll talk more about models later on. Okay, if you have taken the exam and got lesson 7, then you know, I think, that you need to do something about your writing, that there needs to be some way of improving that. So if you're going to continue to do the same things that you did to get whatever your band was before, which could, like in the third point, it could be 6.5, then you're not going to improve on that. So you need to do something different. If you keep getting 6.5, and this is quite a common occurrence, I meet many IELTS students who have taken the exam 2, 3, sometimes even as many as 7, 8, 9, 10 times, and they keep getting this band 6.5 for the writing, and sometimes for the other parts too. And all I can say is that you're becoming an expert at 6.5, and it is possible to become an expert at 6.5. And in order to become an expert at 7, then you need to drastically change the way that you're approaching your preparation. Because if you keep doing the same thing, then you're going to continue to get 6.5. So that you need to think about. If you're writing lots and lots of essays, then you're making lots and lots of the same mistakes. So, and I'll mention this again later, more is not necessarily the best way of giving you quality with the writing. It is with the reading, it is with the listening, and it most definitely is with the speaking. But with the writing, the more you do doesn't necessarily guarantee a better result. And in fact, less is often more. So that's something else that you might want to consider. Okay. The first thing you need to do if you want to get band 7 is to be very realistic about your English level. So you have to be honest with yourself. Do you think that you are band 7 level? If you look at the model essays, it will tell you. You can see the language that's used and the vocabulary that's used. Have you got that level of language in you? Have you got those words? Have you got that structure? Are you able to use those sorts of linking words, etc.? And if you have, then that's fine. Then you just need to go ahead and practice your writing so that you're going to get that band 7 level every time you write anything. If you haven't, then you have to be really honest and say, the first thing I need to do is improve my English. And I think for a lot of people who are trying to move from 6.5 to 7, the biggest problem is that their English is just not good enough. And what these people should be concentrating on, and if you find yourself in that group, what you need to concentrate on in that case is not the IELTS, but your English. Have you written recently? If it's a long, long time since you've done any writing, then you may need some time just to get up to speed with the process before you start looking at the IELTS. Again, if you can get somebody to look at your writing, that's good. If it's a teacher, that's better, because not only can they find, that's fine, Elena, don't worry, not only can they find the mistakes for you, they can also advise you how to change your writing and how to overcome these mistakes. Whereas a native speaker can say, that's not right, or that doesn't sound right, but they won't really be able to help you to improve it very much. And if you don't have access to a teacher, then how are you going to assess what you write? And this is a very important question if you are working by yourself. Okay, let's move on. Right, the writing in IELTS, and I think this is the case for all of IELTS, is very straightforward. There are no tricks. It's not about trying to find magic buttons or anything like that. It's very, very straightforward. In the first task, you describe data. In the second task, you are asked to write some sort of essay about a topic, but there are no tricks or anything. So you can approach it very, very systematically. And these things you must know how to do. You must know how to analyze the question and find out exactly what it is that you are being asked. So, for example, I was working with a student this morning, and she had a question that she'd just written an essay on, which was, how far do you agree? And she wasn't sure whether she should do for and against in that particular essay. So you have to think about what it's asking you. How far do you agree with this statement? That's not a for and against. It's asking you to choose one side and then say how much you agree with that side. Are you 100% in agreement, or are you only 60% in agreement? So in that case, with that type of question, you are definitely down on one side. So it's very important to analyze those words like how far, discuss, what's your opinion, so that you really know what's being asked. Now the second one is planning. I hear all the time, oh, I haven't got time to plan in the essay, in the exam. I really haven't got time to plan. But if you don't plan, it's going to be more difficult to write. If you do a good plan, then the essay will just about write itself. So remember that a good plan, which will take you less than 5 minutes, will actually help you while you're writing to concentrate on the language, because all of the ideas will have been worked out in the plan. And if you're trying to concentrate on the language as well as the ideas, then there's too much to do, and you're not going to get it done in the time that you're allowed. So make sure you do some sort of plan. Write down the points you want to cover. Write down any words, any linking words or sentence beginners that you really want to use in that essay, because you'll forget them once you start writing. So use the first 2, 3 to 5 minutes maximum to make a little plan, and you'll find that in the long run it pays off, because then you will make fewer mistakes. And then finally, do you know what an IELTS essay should look like? Do you know how long your introduction is going to be, how long your conclusion is going to be, which is probably only a couple of sentences. I would say if you're going into 3 sentences in your introduction, you're in danger of going over the word count, and that takes time. Do you know how many sentences you're going to have in each paragraph? I mean, normally you would have 3 points to make on average. Each point needs a statement, then a support sentence, so why are you making this point, and then an example. So you can actually work it out fairly mathematically, but you must know what this looks like. You should have in your mind a kind of graphic of how this essay looks on the paper, and that's all part of getting out a Band 7 essay. Okay, let's move on and look about the language. So you have to be really honest here. How many linking words do you know? You do need a good range. One of the key factors in a 6.5 essay is lots of repetition. If you repeat words over and over, then you're unlikely to get a 7. You're more likely to get a 6.5. The reason being, if you use a word, let's say you use the word furthermore, which is a really good word to try and incorporate into your essay. So you use the word furthermore, and then in the next sentence you use the word furthermore again. The first time the examiner is going to see it and think, wow, that's good, I'm glad they've used that word, that's looking like a 7. And then they see it again, and again maybe, then they think, oh, well actually this person only knows that word. So their range of linking words and vocabulary is very narrow. So now I'm going to downgrade it. I'm going to think this is more like 6, 6.5, not 7. And just as an impact on the reader, if you use the same word, which is a good word, if you use it again and again, it loses that goodness, it loses that power. So you need to have a good range. Are your sentences very simple? That means, are they just a normal sentence with verb, subject, object, 1 or 2 adjectives? Or are they more complex? Do you have 2 sentences joined together, and are these joined together effectively? If you're looking at Band 7, your sentences need to be more complex. So they're going to run to at least 2 lines, some of them. Do you have some great opening sentences? Can you use present participles to open a sentence? Can you use passives to open a sentence? Or are you just using the same old types of sentence? Because again, to get a 7 you need a good range. And the same with your closing sentences. Have you got a good way of making an impact, but in using very good vocabulary and very accurate structure? So all of these things are important. And can you organize ideas in a logical and sequential way? And if you do a complex sentence that goes on for 2+ lines, do you get lost? Or can you actually control what is happening in that sentence? So this kind of thing is all important when you're looking for a Band 7 or 8 in your writing. And if you feel that any of these areas are lacking in your English, then you need to go back to your grammar book and you need to go back to your language training and have another look at that before you continue with your IELTS preparation. It's absolutely key. You must remember that the IELTS is a test of your English and your performance in English. It's not a test of your ideas. Your ideas are less important. So long as you make them clearly and convincingly, you don't even have to agree with the ideas you present, but they do have to be expressed in the best English that you have. Okay. So, here's some ways of improving your general English in order to have a really good start to your IELTS preparation. So, if you can, do some general writing practice. Don't worry about the IELTS format. Just write anything. And normally, when I start working with students myself, then I will ask them first to just send me anything at all so I can have a look. Don't worry about timing, because timing comes right at the end. The thing is to get some good writing going with some good language. Work on your planning. Make sure that you know how to plan an essay. Do a lot of reading to widen your vocabulary. Reading is amazing. You can get a lot of vocabulary, but you must read widely. Don't just read the same things. With the internet you can find all sorts of things, but read newspapers, read magazines, anything at all that will help you improve your vocabulary. And have a notebook, and when you're working with your reading, if you find some really good phrases or some really good language usages and you think, I really think that would go into my IELTS essay, then make a note of them. And then the next time you do an essay, try and include those things in your essay. So yeah, do any exercises you need to do with technique. So if you find in your language books or online any kinds of exercises that will help with writing. So they might be simple gap filling exercises. They might be one type of exercise that is incredibly useful, what we call transformation exercises, and if you look in some of the Cambridge books you'll find these, where they give you a sentence and you have to transform it by using a different point of grammar. So it could be by changing a verb to a noun, or it could be by changing an active to a passive sentence. And all these kinds of transformations help you in your writing in the exam to say the same thing in two different ways so that you're avoiding that danger of repetition. And look at writing yourself. How are things constructed? And you can do this very well by using your IELTS reading. Your IELTS reading will provide you with really good models of writing, and that's the kind of writing that you're going to want to put into your IELTS writing exam. So use those readings. If you finish doing the reading exercise, just look at a paragraph from one of the readings and have a look at the language and pick out some good linking words, some good starting phrases, some nice examples of images, or however it's constructed. Whatever you see in there that you think would be useful and would give great impact to your own writing, write them in your notebook or online if it's an online notebook, and then the next time you write, try and see if you can use these phrases. If you don't use them, you'll forget them. So you really need to try and use them. And experiment. It's a good idea to experiment during your preparation, because remember, if you keep doing the same things, you keep getting the same result. Okay, let's move on. Now these are two books that I use myself with students, and I'm also recommending that you try and get hold of if you can. So they're both by Sam McCarter. I don't know if you know Sam. He writes a lot of IELTS books, and he does a lot of talks and everything on IELTS. Now Sam specialised in teaching doctors initially in medical English, and then when the doctors were required to take the IELTS, he moved into IELTS. and he writes mostly for people who are wanting to get Band 7. This book on writing, which I think is still in print, is an incredible book for getting your writing up to speed. It's a book of exercises, and it looks at analysing writing, and there are lots and lots of exercises to help you put together ideas, put together paragraphs. It really is excellent, and it's aimed at Band 7 and above. So it's quite a sophisticated book. So if you can get hold of it. Yes, Elena, it is. It's really good. I know Sam very well. He's a friend of mine. That's not why I'm plugging his book. I just think it is an excellent book. But we used to work together doing IELTS with the doctors. But he's got a certain way of looking at things which I've found my students find very, very helpful when dealing with Band 7. And the other one is more of a skills, but again I would recommend that too if you need help with your writing and you want to do some more fundamental work to get it up to the right band. Okay. Right, so once you've tackled your English, then you can start to think about your IELTS practice. So be very aware that the English is the key thing. And it doesn't matter how much IELTS practice you do, if your English is not really up to scratch, then you're going to struggle. And you might as well do it from a comfortable position. Okay, don't do more than one essay at a time. I frequently used to get maybe 4 essays from students, and I can tell you every single essay had exactly the same mistakes in them. Because when you're writing things simultaneously, you do tend to just do the same thing, so you get the same mistakes. So you only need to write one essay at a time. Shahab, yes, I think they are available on the internet, but I'm not sure. I mean, they're available to buy, but whether they're available as downloads, I'm not sure. Sorry, that was a question on the books. So, take as long as you need. I personally believe, and I've seen this happen with all of my students, that if you can get a Band 7 essay out of yourself once, then you've got it. But it takes a long time. So in order to get an essay that is a really good, solid Band 7, you need to take as long as you need to take. Now if it takes you 2 hours, 3 hours, it doesn't matter, because once you've got it in your muscle, so to speak, then you're not going to lose it. You're not going to go back to 6.5, because once you've done it, and it is almost a physical thing, that you spend time on this essay, you've done your analysis of models, you've looked at what you need, you've analysed the question, you've done a wonderful plan, and now you're really going to get this essay. It's the best essay that you can possibly write, and it's going to be Band 7. And it takes you 3 hours, but once you've done it, you've done it. And then you won't need to go back. You'll just need to keep that essay at that level, or in fact improve it. And I always recommend that people try and go for Band 8, because the nearer you can get to Band 8, the easier it will be to get the Band 7. So you will not drop to a 6.5. So get that essay out of you. Get someone to check it, preferably somebody who knows what they're doing, i.e. an IELTS teacher or an English language teacher. And then once you've got that and the teacher or whoever marks it says to you, okay, this is brilliant, this is Band 7, definitely Band 7, then you can start to move towards Band 8 so that you're safe. But you have to get that essay out of yourself first. And normally when I work with students, they only do me 1 essay a week. And that's enough, because you don't need to keep doing more and more. But you have to get that first one under your belt. Okay, yes, you need to use models. So As I mentioned before, you can find lots and lots of models from all over the internet. In the Cambridge IELTS books there are models, in other IELTS books there are models, and use these models as a reservoir of language. So you're going to harvest these models for language, for vocabulary. So analyze them. I say here, go very, very deep, really deep. Read them through and think, what impresses you about this essay? Which bit of this essay do you think is just incredible or amazing? And take it, take that language, take the vocabulary, take the linking words, put them in your notebook, because you're going to use those. Check the vocabulary. Really dissect this essay. And then when you do your next essay, you're going to try and put that back together. In fact, one exercise I do with students is I give them an essay, a Band 7 essay, and then I ask them to analyze it and then try and recreate it without looking at the essay. So you're going to dissect it, you're going to take out the bits, and you're going to use them to produce your own. Okay. And when you do produce your own, play with the ideas. Do experiments. It's a great time to experiment when you're doing your preparations, so long as you have somebody to check it who can say, oh, don't do that. For example, I'll talk about another student of mine recently who was just doing some amazing work on getting together a range of vocabulary, and he was reading everything. He was reading journals, newspapers, things on the internet, he was watching movies, he was listening to the radio, doing so much work, and his essays were getting better and better and better. And then suddenly they changed slightly, and he was experimenting, but what he was doing was writing like a journalist. So I was getting essays from him that were just like a piece of journalism. They had a lot of impact, they had amazing story pictures. You know, when you read it you could see the pictures. They were very lively and full of life and fantastic writing, but grammatically they had suffered because journalistic writing tends to be slightly ungrammatical, because they're going for impact over accuracy. And so I had to kind of pull him back and say, this is great that you're experimenting, but we need to get back to IELTS and not go too far with what you're doing. So, you know, he was doing something that was actually far better than IELTS, but for the purposes of the exam, he had to come back down. So experimenting is good, so long as you can get somebody to help you. And of course you want to do the best writing you can in the exam. So try everything, and then you'll find soon where your style is, what you're comfortable with, and an essay that you know you can produce every single time that you have to write an essay. And once you're in that place, then you know that in the exam you're going to get that Band 7. So that's the kind of place you're looking for. You're looking for the place where, as one other student said to me just before she took her exam, I'm 110% confident. And that is incredible, to go into the exam feeling that confident. And she passed. She got her 7 in everything. But she did a lot of work in the meantime. But she said, I know what a Band 7 writing looks like, I know how to do it, and I know that I can do it. And she did. So that level of confidence can only come from experimenting, from analysing, from dissecting, and then from putting it together and getting that Band 7. Okay, so here are some things that you can do to get that essay. You need to become an expert at 7. If you do the things I mentioned to you before, then you will become an expert at Band 7. Compare different styles. If you look at the models, you'll find that they are not all the same. There isn't a particular IELTS style. There is a particular framework in that you have to have an introduction and a conclusion and 2 or 3 middle paragraphs. And there are some certain phrases that you will see over and over and over again in the essays. But there isn't a particular IELTS style, so you can find your own style within that framework. And as I said before, keep experimenting. And I would advise you not to worry at all about timing until you get closer to your exam. Because once you've done, say, 3 or 4 Band 7 essays or Band 8 essays that are consistent, and you know how to do that every time, then you simply need to work on your timing. It's like when my daughter plays the piano, and whenever she gets a new piece, she goes too quickly, and the teacher says, go very, very slowly, because once your fingers know where to go, then you can speed up. So it's quite easy for you to speed up once you know what you're doing. So in the beginning, don't time it at all, and don't worry. Okay. Right, I'm going to have a look in a minute at a task 1. But before I do that, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the work I do. And if you want to work with me, I am actually starting a new program at the beginning of December. And I'll just put the link in for you. This is a 6-week program. And it's not just on writing, it is on everything to do with IELTS. So I'm limiting the program to 15 people maximum, and that will mean 3 groups of 5 for speaking classes. We do the speaking via Skype, and the rest of it is online. And you're given a program that you work through yourself, and then there are 2 Skype meetings, and you'll also get to send writing every week, which will be marked and sent off. So I just want to tell you about that because it's happening very, very soon. And if you're interested in joining this program, and it's aimed really at 7 and 8, but if you need a band that's lower than 7 and 8, then it's also perfect for you, because obviously you'll be working at quite a high level, which means if you want 6 or 6.5, then you'll certainly be able to achieve that. Now, normally the program costs $997. But I'm actually offering it for $697 for anybody that is through gap fillers or on this call. But as a special offer, I'm offering it to the 30th of November for just $497. And that's about 2 hours a day of self-study practice, plus all the extra work with the Skype, and also with the writing that you'll get every week. So I've put the link, and I'll leave you to go and have a look at that yourselves. But if you want to work with me on that program, and I've used that program for the last 3 or 4 months with lots of students, and we've had very good results. So have a look, and if you can sign up by November the 30th, then you will get it at a much reduced price. And that will run for 6 weeks. So that will mean that you will be ready to take your exam in January. So we'll start the first week of December, and we'll work right through. Christmas is at the weekend this year, so that won't interfere too much. Okay, so let's get back to the content I have to offer you today. And I want to look at task 1. Task 1 is simply a description of some data. And it's quite a common thing that happens in many different fields. In business, it's very common. In scientific areas, in economics, it's quite common to take pieces of data and then write very brief descriptions about them. And this is exactly what you're asked to do in task 1. So it's pretty straightforward. You're given the data and you're asked to describe it. Now here's a source, if you haven't seen that source before, the UK Guardian. I believe there's also one from The Economist, but this is a source of data from everyday life. It's not specialised, it's not specific economic data, it's not specialised business data, but it gives you lots of examples, so it's a good source for you to look at for models. The Economist too. Also, the business pages in some of the in some of the newspapers that you can find online, they also give you exactly the right type of writing that you're going to need for task 1. And generally it's quite short, so it's probably around the right length as well. Remember, it's only 150 words, so you have to really go for the bare bones and not be too elaborate with your language for task 1. Okay. Not everything is data. You have to know all the different types of writing. For example, one of the more difficult ones I find is process. Now, writing a process should be quite straightforward, but sometimes it's difficult to get that into 150 words. So you need to look at models for that too, and also the maps, and also the comparisons where you have something. For example, it might be the development of a village over 30 years or something like that, and you have to track that. So do make sure that you are familiar with all the different types of task 1 writing. Vocabulary. You need to look at vocabulary around numbers. Collocation is quite an important word in more advanced English. There are certain ways that we say things, and these ways are accepted, and other ways of saying the same thing using a different combination of words can often sound strange. So collocation is something you really need to be very good with, particularly around numbers. And sequencing would be for the process. So you must know how to use first, second, then, next, all of those kinds of words. So make sure that you can do all of that for task 1. Now this is a quotation from a student. In fact, the student that gave me that link to The Guardian, because I didn't know about that, and it was one of my students who suggested it and said he thought it was very useful for IELTS students, and certainly he was correct. So it's about data and statistics in everyday life, so it's quite relevant. Okay, I think it's quite nice to look at the work of your friends if they get 7s or 8s. It's quite, you know, a good source to look at. But remember, the work of friends is going to have errors, and there's always a danger that you might pick up some of those errors as well. So I would say, yes, do have a look at your at the work of your friends and your classmates, but don't use them as models. If you want to use models, use real models from the real world, because I think they're going to be error-free and they're going to be more valuable to you. And in the task 1, make sure you focus on the task. Only what's on that page, that's all you need. You don't need to add anything from outside. And in fact, mostly you're going to have enough to do to try and contain all of that into your task 1, because it's only 150 words and you're looking at ideally 15 minutes of writing plus some practice. Okay. Shahab, I'm getting a message from you, but I can't see it anywhere. Okay, here are 2 blogs that you may have come across. Simon, excellent. He gives a little lesson every day. If you haven't seen Simon's blog, I haven't got the URL for it. I don't know if you know it, Elena, but it's I think it's called Simon IELTS or IELTS Simon, and you'll find it. And the other one is Dominic Cole. Again, he's got some very good information. Now, he hasn't updated it since September, so I'm not quite sure what's going on with his blog, but it's still got a lot of really good information on it, even though it's a couple of months since he's done anything. So those two are really worth looking at. Right, and let's have a look at an example. One that I forgot to mention before was the table, and this is a table. And the table is actually the most difficult, I think, of all of the task ones, because it contains a lot of information, and it's essential that you group the information. So I wanted to have just a very brief look at this one. It's a very typical IELTS type task 1 question, and it's in 2 parts. And more, thank you Elena, more and more I think we're getting these 2-part task 1s. So here you've got the table, which is about sports injuries, and here you've got a diagram which is essentially a pie chart. It is a picture, but essentially it works the same as a pie chart. Now you need to group. So we look first for the significant. This is a big figure, so obviously it's significant, it's much bigger than anything else. And then if we've got the largest, then usually we'll balance that with the smallest figure. And then if we look here, we can see that these ones are pretty similar. They're all around the 3,000 mark, so we can probably group those together for that criteria. And the others you may not even want to mention, because it would be impossible to mention all of them. If we look here again, we've got one very significant figure, and then the others fairly close to each other. You might want to mention that one, but these are all pretty similar, so you can group them. And here again, these are pretty similar, you can group them. And if we go to the next one, again we've got a significant figure. But what's interesting here is that these two are associated with the same sport, but this one is not. So there must be something going on there that you can analyze and talk about in your writing. Okay, and then again, look at the grouping. So we've got 7s, 6, 5s, they're all pretty similar, but this one is significantly lower, so you may want to make a special point about that. And in the final column, actually, there's not a great deal of difference between these. So you might want to put, say, the 80s together and the 90s together. Okay, so we've done that. Then we've got 2 parts to this question. So we can't even, I think, mention all of these. So you then need to select which are the most important. So I think the most significant thing is that this is the highest number of injury. Yeah? But they don't go into hospital. People who sustain these injuries don't go into hospital as much as the people who are playing rugby. So there's a contrast there that you can use in your writing. And then when you come to this part of the question, which is to do with the position of injuries, you can see that we have 2 figures that are different, and the rest are pretty much the same. So we're probably going to highlight this one particularly, possibly that one, and then these can be grouped together. And that's how we're going to work on this. So look for that, find your groupings. Here the groupings are natural because of the numbers. In another instance you might have a grouping, for example if it was sport, you might have groupings that were team sport versus individual sport, or sports played with balls as opposed to other types of sport. So look for areas that you can group, because that's going to make your job a heck of a lot easier. Okay. Let me move on. Before I do, has anybody got any questions so far? Anything you want to ask, or anything you're not sure about? Okay, thank you Nick, thank you Elena. Okay, I'll go on then. So now let's go to task 2. Okay, to help you with task 2, look at the reading passages. Okay, these are much longer than you're going to need, but you can take out a lot of the language that you find in the reading. So it's not going to be difficult to find information. Go over past topics. Now, there are places all over the internet where you can get past topics. And one thing you can do, and I always recommend students do this when they're getting close to the exam, is not write an essay on every topic, but go through some of the topics and look at the question, what is it asking me, and then in your head decide if you've got enough information to answer that topic. Do you have enough language on that particular topic to write the essay? Do you know enough about the topic to write the essay? And if you don't, then go off and find out something about this topic. So let's say it's something on obesity, and you think, oh, I don't have any vocabulary for that, and I'm not really sure about this topic, I don't know what I would write about it, then it's worth going and finding a newspaper article or a journal article or something on that topic so that you can pick up some vocabulary and pick up some structure that you could use if you got that in the exam. So you don't have to write an essay on everything, but you do need to analyze them a little to make sure you've got enough language should you get that question. Okay, again I said newspapers, articles, the readings that you get, things on the internet, even blogs are quite useful to read, so any of those. Okay. If you hear something on the news that you think, oh, that could be an IELTS topic, or that's an interesting one, then go and find the newspaper article about it, because there will be. Shahab, I'm sorry, I'm getting a message from you, but I just can't access it. So I don't quite know what to do about that. It keeps telling me, but when I click it disappears. So I don't know if you're having a problem with listening or something. Okay. And finally, remember, reading informs your writing. That means that you get your information and your list or your body of vocabulary and structure from your reading, just as speaking informs listening or listening informs speaking. So you get your speaking information and your speaking ideas and vocabulary from what you listen. So in the exam, these 4 papers are not isolated. The listening will help you with your writing. So when you listen, do the listening test, but then listen again and write down 3 or 4 phrases or even more phrases that you think you could use in your speaking. And when you're reading, write down some vocabulary and some phrases and structure that you can use in your writing. Okay. None of language works in isolation. They all feed each other. Right. Essays one at a time, and spend time. Really write them carefully. I once taught an IELTS class some years ago in a college, and the students did 2 essays a week. And every time I got their essays, I marked them, I wrote down some suggestions and some ideas about vocabulary or where their mistakes had been. I told them to go look at particular grammar points. I handed back the essays, and then I gave them the next one. And after 2 or 3 weeks, I realized that they were getting the same scores over and over, and nothing was changing for any of them. So one day I decided that we were going to have a bit of a brainstorm on this problem. So I said to them I couldn't understand why their essays weren't improving, why they were just getting the same over and over and over. And it turned out that they took their essay from me, they looked at the band score that I'd given them at the bottom, they put the essay in their bag or in their folder, and they never looked at it again. So of course they went to write their second essay, and their second essay was not informed by the mistakes they'd made on the first one. And so they just kept going over and over and over, doing the same thing again and again. So it's very, very important to learn from the mistakes that you make, or from the other sorry, I've just got a message. Okay. the other comments that you get. You must learn from them, and making mistakes is good. If you don't make mistakes, you won't improve. But you do have to learn from them, and you do have to use those to improve on your next try. Okay, planning I think is really important. It gives structure and balance, it gives you your ideas. Once you've got the framework, you can write it more quickly. It cuts down on the mistakes because when you're writing, you're concentrating on the language and you're not trying to juggle language and ideas. And if you have a really good tight plan, that means paragraph, you know, point S, sentence 1, point this, sentence 2, this point, first paragraph, you know, idea, support, example. If you've got a really tight structure on your plan, then you will not make as many mistakes, and it will be quicker, and you'll have time at the end then to go back and check everything. So I believe the plan is the key to getting your essay done on time. And then finally, if you can get somebody to mark your essays while you're working, then you should do that. Because obviously, if you don't see your mistakes, you're not going to be able to learn from them. You're not going to be able to move on easily. And finally, let's have a task 2. So, this is a fairly typical IELTS question. And can anybody type in the box what the question is about, what it's asking about? Any brave volunteers? Nope. Because I've asked this a few times and some people have said working with computers, working with technology. In actual fact, this is the question here. What dangers are there for a society which depends on computers? That is the question. It's not about technology making communication easier. That's background. That gives you the focus and the topic. But it's about the dangers for society, not for individuals, of spending a lot of time on computers and not having personal contact. So sometimes to rephrase the question will help you, but this is where your question is, what dangers? Sometimes it might be what measures. Sometimes it might be how far do you agree? Sometimes it might be what are the advantages and disadvantages? Or it could be, how do you feel about this? What's your opinion? So those are the kinds of words that you're looking for, and they will tell you what the topic is and what they are expecting. So if you were to write this essay and not talk about dangers, then you're not writing this essay, you're writing a different essay, another essay about technology. So be very, very clear that you've understood what the question is asking you. That's the first thing. And then, of course, you need to analyze it and decide what you're going to put in there. So this bit at the beginning, technology is making communication easier, that would be a really good use for your introduction. You could take that language, rework it, transform it into a different way, and use that as your introduction. And then you can start and talk about the dangers. And you need to pick out some of the dangers. So I don't know what dangers you think. It could be that people don't interact anymore, there's no society, that people live in isolation, and what are the dangers for people living in isolation rather than in community. And so you come up with your ideas. And then think about, if people don't speak to each other, what happens? And what impact does that have on society? So do be very careful when you're analysing your question. and then each of your points that you've decided to make, each of your dangers. This is not a for and against, and it's not an advantage, disadvantage, so you don't even have to say anything about the good points. But if you want to, you can, so long as you don't make that the focus. And probably the safest place to do that is to put them in the conclusion.